I can tell you exactly why you are older, yet your hair is getting worse. And it has nothing to do with DHT. It has more to do with fat. Let's talk. This is Back to the Barber, where scalp conditions are met and maintained. It's your host, AQBS, but most importantly, a fellow client. Hope all is well today, gents. The primary topic is a thinning and receding scalp is a flattened scalp, seconded by other relevant information and commentary. So let's get started. One of the first things that I noticed when I started to even consider regrowing my hair, or in my case, repairing my scalp, I noticed that there was a big difference between what the sides and the back of the scalp looked and felt like versus the top. Even visually now, if you're balding or receding or just plain, just all bald, right? Look in the mirror straight ahead and notice that the sides of your scalp are much thicker. I don't mean the hair, I meant just the skin in general. Take your finger and press up against the side of your head. Then press it up against the back of your head. Then take that same finger and touch the crown. Then touch the temples. What you're going to find is something very interesting. It seems that the sides of the head and the back of the head have more meat or muscle or subcutaneous fat, while the top, that they call the gallia, is pretty thin. Now, when you look at the scalp or even a head from an anatomy perspective, now I've looked at so many videos of doctors doing, to be honest with you, surgeries on cadavers and opening up the scalp really to see how it really looks underneath there. And you notice something right away, that the scalp or the skin on top of this subcutaneous fat or this fat layer that's kind of fibrosis like or fiber like. This fiber and fat sits along the entire skull, and the skin layer sits right on top of it. Now, when you look at that skin layer on a like some sort of picture or diagram, you will find that it looks much thicker than when you look at the skin layer or the flap of the scalp on a cadaver, because they kind of condense it down. I mean, the skin is what it really is. But when you look at it from an anatomy perspective or diagram, it looks much thicker, like you have all these things. But when you look at them pulling out, let's just say in a hair transplants, they're pulling out these plugs of follicles, you will find that they dip this follicle plug down into, past the skin, into that fat type of fibrosis layer, not fibrosis, but fiber layer. So even when they pull out the follicle, you will find that the follicle is surrounded by like a fatty substance, and on the bottom of that dermopapilia, you will notice that it will be just like a little bit of fat surrounding it. And I came to the conclusion pretty early on that, look, it looks like the food of the follicle is fat, right? Because I keep seeing these diagrams and these drawings of these vessels plugged to the dermopapilia, but then when you see them pull one out, you never really see that. And if that's the case, look, If there was a direct connection to the dermal papilla to an actual blood vessel or something to that effect, right? Artery, not necessarily artery, but something smaller, right? Then when they took that hair plug out of a follicle and they cut a hole into the top of your head and kind of pushed it in there, then that would die as soon as you leave the surgeon's office. Because I mean, they're cutting into the scalp from a aesthetic perspective, how deep it should be, how much space in between the follicles. They have it down to a science. But the point I'm making is, it is impossible to plug a follicle you just removed from the sides into an artery, because it's the fat layer, right? Which brings me to my point. If you look, you will find that hair loss is very, very strongly tied to having a flattened top. The temples, you will notice that the skin layer it's like as if it's paper compared to the sides. And I noticed that the flatter or the less layer of subcutaneous fat you have, this fat layer on your scalp, the more that male pattern balding gets worse. And you can almost see the indentations of a man who's totally bald, Norwood 7+. When he shaves it down with a razor, look at his head pretty close, and you will find that there's like you can almost see his skull like through that. But if you go get a man who just buzzes his head, it doesn't show these indentations. It doesn't show the scullery underneath it, because the fat layer kind of makes a layer around the skull, and the skin sits on top of that layer. But DHT seems to be targeting that layer as well too. So once the fat is removed from that layer, probably via DHT, and we know that DHT is there because of inflammation. We know inflammation is there because of some autoimmune response, has to do with a pathogen or protein, something like that, more than likely from the gut. You will find that only things left is the fiber, which brings me to the next point. They specify that there is a fat and fiber level or layer. However, we call fibrosis when underneath the skin layer is just a hardened type of denseness that is not supple. It is not omega-like. It's very tense, and you will notice that it fits along perfectly with the theory that male pattern balding, half of the problem and the main reason why it doesn't grow back by itself, is simply because the fat layer has been stripped down via DHT, so that there's nothing except for skin, that top layer, and that follicle is sitting directly on top of some sort of fiber, and it's getting no nutrients, because guess what? The nutrients are in the fat. This is why PRP works. This is why them putting stem cells underneath the skin works, so it can start rebuilding things and providing nutrients and rebuilding. And if it's an infection in the skin, an inflammation in the skin, and there's no nutrient-oxygenic layer, then guess what? There's nothing happening, man. And the last thing I'll say about this, notice that when the man recedes, his hairline moves back. You will notice that it becomes very, very hard in the front, and it moves back as if something is kind of rolling the scalp over. And what is that something? It's fibrosis. It's calcification. It's the body quarantining the scalp. And one of the ways it does is via DHT, is nothing's left underneath that scalp except for fiber, right? And that's how it goes. So that's my video for today. Hopefully something here has helped you to halt hair loss and or restore it. If so, hit the like or subscribe. If not, give another video a chance. I'm pretty sure you'll find something interesting. But if I can do it, you can do it too. Let's get you back to the bar.